Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy raised by Big Mom Part 4. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. Here second. Luffy said, stretching his legs to pump the blood since his arms were caught by his aunt. What the? Compet dropped Luffy surprised when the genie hit her, along with the sudden burning from her now glowing pink nephew. Gum jet pistol. Luffy said as he slammed his fist into Oven, who was trying to hit him now that he was upright and Luffy was free from Compet. The punch landed square in Oven's face and sent him skidding back. That won't work on me. Defuku snarled as his genie lunged at Luffy again, only for Luffy to dodge as he jumped high up in the air. Here third. Luffy said as he bit his thumb, blowing air into it and making it grow bigger and bigger. His hands larger than giants. Big Mom gasped in disbelief as they all stared in shock, Defuku going a bit pale when he saw the now large fist above him. Giant rifle. Luffy yelled as he slammed his fist down where Defuku was, a dark dangerous look on his face that surprised his relatives since he had been so happy just a moment ago, and the look on his face had some of them tensing out of reflex. Ugh. This thing is ridiculously strong. Compet said, barely managing to keep the fist from slamming into her brother as she held her arms up to stop it, her arms coated in hockey and shaking horribly as she stood in front of her younger brother. She ended up breathing hard and her body had dug into the ground hard enough to leave mini craters when Luffy finally pulled away his fist, but it remained large. Katakuri's face went a bit pale as he saw something about to happen. Watch out, Compet knee. Katakuri yelled the warning as Luffy's giant fist turned pitch black with hockey. Compet went wide-eyed and quickly jumped out of the way, Defuku having long since jumped away from that spot once his sister had saved his hide. There was a large long hole drilled deep into the ground by the pitch-black fist for a moment, and when the fist was removed, there wasn't a single stone out of place. It was all perfectly ground to dust into a clean crater. I'm surprised he didn't do worse. Nami said, a bit surprised and made the now gaping in shock and horror family members stare at her in disbelief. He can do worse. But that would have even taken me out if it hit head-on. Cracker said, alarmed and pale as he stared at the damage Luffy's giant fist had done to the ground. Possibly me as well. Smoothie said, wide-eyed even as she held Brulee still, despite the woman not struggling anymore and instead gaping at her son's power. Looks like he's about to use that move. Sanji said, noting something with his own hockey and putting out his cigarette as he moved back a little further away from the field. You can spit on me, laugh at me, hit me, mock me in my dream all you want. I don't care. I'll just laugh it off. Luffy yelled to Defuku, who was looking rather pale at how much he had pissed off his now very dangerous looking nephew, quickly summoning out his genie to try and hold off his nephew till he collapsed. But the minute you attack or mock my Nakama, that's when I'll get pissed off. Luffy said, stretching his still large and black fist back and making more than a few siblings scream or yelp when it caught on fire. Giant red hawk. Luffy roared as he slammed the giant flaming fist straight into the charging genie and his uncle, knocking them clear out of the arena and possibly to the other side of the island. Threatening my Nakama is not a good idea. Luffy said, turning to the other two combatants that looked rather pale and horrified at how easily he had just taken down Defuku, although they were relieved when his hand shrunk back down to its normal size. Red Hawk Gatling. Luffy shot out both of his flaming fists so fast it seemed as if they multiplied as they slammed into Oven. The heat didn't bother him really, the fact that it was fire didn't bother him much, but multiple flames and coated fists slamming into him rapidly over and over when he was already winded a good bit. Yeah, that knocked him down and out. And people's dreams never end. Luffy yelled, making Nami's breath catch, while Luffy turned to Compet with his face still set in stone. You're stronger than them, Gear 4th. Luffy said, huffing slightly as he took on his Gear 4th form, making even his crewmates look shocked at it. Apple Palooza. Compet yelled, throwing several exploding apples at Luffy, who didn't look afraid in the least. On gun. Luffy countered with his own attack, hitting the apples and making them blow up before they even made it halfway to the rest of him. Compet barely had time to bring her arms up in a guard in front of her face before the large black fist hit and pushed her several yards back before her guard broke. Compet gasped out a bit of saliva and a bit of blood as she was knocked right into her mother from the force of the hit. No one threatens my crew or mocks their dreams. Luffy snarled dangerously as he glared down at everyone else, using Soru to appear in front of his friends and crew protectively. It's okay, Luffy. They aren't going to do it anymore. Nami tried to calm down her captain, while Katakuri and Aman walked over quickly as a few other siblings checked on the downed fighters. It's alright, little nephew. You did it. You won. Katakuri said calmly to his nephew, while Aman took a more direct approach. She walked right up to Luffy unafraid and grabbed his hat. Reaching up, a man took off her own hat and gently placed it on his head while putting his hat on her own head. You won. Rest now. A man said with a small hiss to her words as she stared Luffy right in his eyes, showing her own slit eyes that were like snakes. Smiling gently at her nephew who was beginning to power down from his gear fourth, a man bared her poisonous snake fangs at her nephew and let her forked tongue poke out enough for him to see it. Luffy smiled a bit as he swayed just a little bit, emotions and fighting, and maybe a bit of the poison, taking its toll on him. The man just chuckled a bit and caught him when he said one thing before passing out for a little while. That's so cool. Morning, sleepyhead. Burly said, smiling softly as she stroked her son's hair back a bit as he began to wake up. Morning, Mom. Luffy grumbled before he turned over and buried his face in the warmth, curling and wrapping around it. Burly smiled brighter than she had in years as her son called her mom and curled up into her. I know you want to sleep, baby, but it's time to get up. Burly said softly as she ran her fingers through her son's hair. Don't wanna. Luffy whined pitifully as he pulled his suddenly larger than normal hat down further. Here, I got this. Nami said to Burly, who looked torn between wanting to wake her son up or let him sleep some more. Luffy. Sanji's got breakfast ready, and if you don't hurry we're going to eat it all. Nami said, moving out of the way and watching amused as Luffy jumped up with a yelp and dashed for his cook. They didn't eat it all, did they? Luffy demanded of Sanji, looking scared of the answer and not calming down until the brim of the hat he was wearing sunk down over his head. Blinking slightly, Luffy looked up at his hat, only to see that he was still wearing a man's hat. Looking around curiously, Luffy noticed most of his aunts and uncles chuckling a bit or glaring at Nami for some reason, while a man was still wearing his signature hat. Welcome back to the waking world, little nephew. Can I have my hat back now? Amanda asked amused as she smiled at Luffy, who grinned and swapped their hats easily without moving off of his cook. Thank you, and don't worry. There's still plenty of food. Amanda said, nodding towards the table that was loaded down with all sorts of sweets, aside from one spot where there were normal breakfast foods and meat set up, made by Sanji himself this morning. You kinda zonked out after the fight, so after I checked on you, they brought us all back to the castle so everyone could get some rest. Sanji and I shared a room while Nami had her own room, and you apparently were comfortable because you stayed right here in this room sleeping on the floor with your head in your mom's lap. Topper said from where he was seated next to where Burly was getting off of the floor, amused at her son's appetite as he appeared in one of the chairs so fast that even Katakuri took a minute to realize he had moved. Like when I fall asleep on Robin. Luffy asked for a piece of ham already halfway to his mouth and made Nami sigh a bit while Sanji grit his teeth before taking a deep breath. Yes, Luffy. Like when you fall asleep on Robin's lap. Nami said, making Luffy reach a now empty hand up to his head and rifle through his hair for a minute before looking confused. Robin Swan's not here, so she didn't place any flowers in your hair while you were sleeping, Captain. Sanji said, making Luffy blink a bit before tilting his head. That's weird. Whenever I wake up there's always flowers in my hair after they open up all pretty. Luffy said, earning fond smiles from his crewmates before Brook drew Luffy's attention. Ah, but the flowers here talk and feel like we do, Luffy-san. We would not want to hurt them by taking them away from their home, would we? Brook asked, looking at his captain, who went wide-eyed at this in amazement. Really? Your flowers talk and everything? Luffy asked, looking at his mother and aunts and uncles nearby wide-eyed in curiosity and awe. Yes, they do. Mama's power enables them to have their own souls, which brings them to life. Sparrow said, nodding to his nephew, whose eyes seemed to grow bigger and rounder at this in amazement. Do they poop? Luffy asked curiously, causing half of his aunts and uncles to choke as well as his grandmother. Burly spluttered a bit in disbelief, a man just queried an eyebrow, and Defuku slammed his head onto the table alongside Oven. Kompet just laughed loudly at the others' reactions, even as Luffy's crewmates aside from Brook slammed their hands into their foreheads. Brook just laughed as well. To think this was the boy who beat up 3 almost sweet commander-level Charlottes. Luffy, why do you ask that about everyone and everything you meet? You asked Kami, you asked Brook. Nami shouted after hitting Luffy on the head, earning a death glare from Burly and the man both. That's how Luffy began to actually answer that question, making Nami's eyebrow twitch as she grabbed a piece of meat nearby and shoved it into his mouth. She didn't want to know. I changed my mind. I don't want to know the answer. Nami yelled, making Luffy swallow the meat and then just smile at her. Oh, okay. You're weird, Nami. Luffy said, laughing a bit before going back to his meal, completely unbothered by anything that just happened. I don't want to hear you or anyone else calling me weird. Nami yelled at Luffy again, her eyebrow twitching horribly, and she was ready to just take out her upgraded climate baton and smack him with it. I wouldn't try and hit him again if I were you. A man's voice said coldly from behind Nami as she flicked a bit of her sword out with clear intent to draw and use it. Huh? Nami turned to look at the snake neck woman curiously, only to pale and keep a bit at how close the taller woman was and how cold she looked as she gripped her sword by the hilt while staring down at Nami. Hit him again and you'll lose that hand. A man simplified, making Nami go pale white, and a bit of what seemed to be her soul left her body, while Sanji stepped over closer to her protectively. I don't hit women. Never have, never will. But I will get in the way of you trying to hurt Nami Swan. Sanji said, making Luffy look up interested while Brook was drawing his guitar from out of nowhere. Eh? Are you about to spar with Auntie like you do with Zoro, Sanji? I thought you'd never hit a woman even if it killed you. Luffy asked, looking at his cook confused and with a piece of bacon hanging out of his mouth a bit. You're right, Captain. I won't hit a woman. But I also won't let her hit a crewmate. Sanji said, even though his gaze never left Amand. Auntie, why are you going to hit my crew? Luffy asked, looking at Amand now confused and a bit alarmed, making her look at him and her face to soften a bit. She hit you? Amand said, making Luffy blink before looking at Nami, who was pretty pale and reaching for her baton. Oh, you mean Nami? Don't worry about that, she does it all the time when me and Zoro are about to do something stupid. I'm rubber though, so it doesn't usually hurt, but I think she learned the Gramps fist of love thing, cause sometimes it really hurts, but that's only when I'm about to do something she says is too stupid for words. Luffy said casually and with a grin on his face, making Amand frown a little, but slowly put her sword back into its sheath, even though she had only drawn it by about an inch or so. You were trying to dive into the water to pick a fight with a sea cow. Nami scowled at her captain as she remembered the most recent bout of stupidity he had before they arrived here. That stupid thing was making me hungry. Luffy whined pitifully to his navigator, whose hand twitched as if to hit him again. Have you forgotten that you can't swim and that you will drown if we don't fish you out of the water? Nami hissed at her captains, whose family were gaping at him in horror and shock, while Katakuri didn't look surprised. He had been there for that after all. Nah, I know I will, but I'm not worried. I trust my crew not to let me drown. Luffy said with a bright smile that had his crew members pausing before they each smiled softly and relaxed a bit more, Chopper nuzzling into Luffy's neck as he climbed up onto the rubber boy's lap. Brook let out a small laugh and began to strum his guitar a bit, while Sanji just ruffled Luffy's hair and Nami patted his head. You idiot. Nami said fondly, even as she still smiled at him, shaking her head a bit, while the Charlottes were amazed at how much Luffy trusted his crew and how his crew reacted to him, saying that he trusted them. Your son is something else, a little sister. Amand whispered to Bruley, who was right beside her, watching as Luffy turned to Brook and asked for music, causing the musician to laugh and begin playing Bink's Sake. Bruley's eyes were shiny with tears, and her smile was sad but loving as she watched her son draw the whole family into singing along with the skeleton. Once again he turned the meal into a party, and it seemed that it was becoming something of a habit for the entire family to get in on it. I know, Sister Amand. So you won't join us, but you can ally with us. That will be acceptable. Big Mom said, making Luffy grin up at her brightly before turning to Brook. Music? Luffy called, earning a laugh from the skeleton, who strung up his guitar again. Which song now is Luffy-san? Brook asked, making Luffy grin wider than many thought possible as he bounced in his seat a bit. It must be easy to grin so widely when you are able to stretch. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Won't even catch my breath. And I know the weight of the world can crush my chest. Luffy began to sing, making the skeleton laugh, and began to strum his guitar as he and Luffy sang the song. It's not because I'm fat. It's not because of money. Work's in my blood and I kill cause I'm hungry. Luffy shouted the lyrics as the rest of the family that knew the song began singing along. You have strange tastes in music, Luffy. Nami said, sighing slightly as Luffy and his family finished up the song. Well, it seemed that he had started up another party by complete accident. Something that Katakuri had noticed was a common thing with his nephew. Mountain bandits. Sanji reminded Nami, who let out an ah as the chef put some more meat before his captain, who gave a happy cry and began to gobble it down. Save some for me. Amand said, hissing slightly at her nephew, whose eyes turned to stars at the reappearance of the hissing lisp and the forked tongue as his aunt stole some meat from his plate, a rare treat for the woman in the predominantly candy kingdom. Cool. Luffy said, clambering into her lap and staring up at her awestruck, earning a soft hissing chuckle and softer smile from the normally cold and distant woman. Amand is unique even amongst my snake-neck children. Linlin said, smiling slightly as she watched her grandson giggle when Amand's forked tongue stuck out and licked him affectionately as she rubbed her cheek against his head. She is more snake in some ways than she is human and has more than just the snake neck part going for her. She is venomous, she has a snake's tongue, and her eyes can turn into that of a snake sometimes as well. It's quite unique and rare for those traits to show up. Linlin explained proudly when Nami and Chopper looked confusedly at the eldest of the snake necks. Venomous? Do you need some anti-venom? It can't be good to have venom in your blood. Chopper asked, looking worried as he tugged lightly on Amand's dress to get her attention. I am naturally immune to my own venom and any weaker than it. Amand assured the reindeer doctor, who relaxed a little at this. Amand was a little confused at how worried the talking raccoon seemed to be. Glancing at her nephew in her lap, Amanda figured it was just because the little doctor wanted to make sure his captain's aunt was okay. Cool. You're poison-proof like me. Oh, but you were born with it. I got it because of that Maggie guy with the stupid venom power. Luffy said, snuggling close to his aunt and looking happy that he had something in common with at least one of his family members, besides his gender or his dark hair at least. Maggie? Do you mean Magellan? The Impel Down Warden? Perospero asked, looking at his nephew alarmed and earning a nod from Luffy. Maggie? Luffy nodded his head again, as if he was unaware that the man had a full name. How did you survive his venom fruit? Oven asked in shock as he stared at Luffy, who just shrugged. Bone-chan and Iva-chan. Luffy said as if that explained everything, which it did to him, but not to anyone else. Well, if he survived the venom fruit, then no wonder my homemade poisoned apples don't have any effect on him. Kompet said, swallowing heavily while Sanji seemed to have paled drastically. Iva? Please tell me that's not Ivankov. Sanji asked weakly and made Luffy look at him wide-eyed. You know Iva-chan? Luffy asked brightly to his cook, who flinched and curled into the fetal position, while the Big Mom pirates looked a bit startled. You know the revolutionary Ivankov? Big Mom asked, staring at her grandson surprised. He saved me in Impel Down and helped me escape and helped me at Marineford too. Iva-chan is my friend. Luffy said, smiling brightly, although his eyes were a bit flinty when he spoke about it. Immune to poisons, huh? Then what about that poisonous fish that you ate? Ryaiju asked, looking at Luffy, who blinked as he remembered that she was there. It made my stomach hurt. That was all. Besides, it tasted nasty. Luffy said, scrunching up his nose before his hand shot out, and he stole a tea cake from Nami's plate, yanking his hand back just before she stabbed a fork through it. That seemed to set off the usual Straw Hat meal routine. The Charlottes and German present watched in disbelief as Luffy stole food from everyone's plates, his crew defending their own plates with expert timing, skill and ease, while the Charlottes hurried to protect their own food. Why are you stealing food? There's plenty to go around. Amanda asked as she looked at the boy, who had yet to leave her lap and in fact seemed like he didn't even notice that he was still sitting on her. You gotta eat fast if you want to eat at all. There's no telling when you'll be attacked or when someone will steal your food. Luffy said, shrugging slightly and looking confused as to why she didn't already know that. Gramps had taught him and aced that back when Luffy was little. I'm chalking that up to him living with mountain bandits. Nami said dryly as she slapped away Luffy's grasping hand again without even looking. Since he's poison-proof, then perhaps we can arrange a marriage to poison Pink Ryaiju. Big Mom said, looking at the pink-colored German royal, who went slightly wide-eyed at this. What a marriage? Hancock kept asking me about marrying her, but I never asked her what that meant. Luffy asked, tilting his head curiously, while Bruley twitched. You fall in love with someone and end up staying with them forever and having kids. Defuku said, still glaring at his nephew for his humiliating defeat at the hands of the much smaller male. I wonder why Hancock wants kids then. Luffy said with a frown as he thought about that, and earned a heavy twitch from Sanji and Yonji, as well as some of his uncles. No. No kids for you, young man. Bruley said instantly as she stared sternly at her son, earning looks from the others. Don't you want grandchildren, Bruley? Perospero asked his sister, who faltered a bit. Well, yes, eventually, but my baby is only 19 and I just got him back. Let my baby stay innocent and naive for at least a little while. Bruley said, earning a snort from her mother which drew Bruley's attention. I had Perospero when I was 18 and Kompet when I was 19. Big Mom pointed out to Bruley, whose head swung around to look at Luffy with her eyes narrowed. That reminds me. When you find a nice woman to start a family with, you'd better not have a new child every year. Bruley said sternly to her son, who was just blinking at her confused. Okay. Luffy agreed with a shrug before turning back to his food when a man stole a piece of ham from his plate. Well, technically their plate since he was still on her lap, but technicalities meant nothing to him. The man nearly choked on the stolen food at the next words out of Luffy's mouth as he stole some bacon from Yonji's plate. Luffy was the last person with any right to say something like that. Moms are weird. Can we keep him, Mama? I like my adorable little nephew. Amanda asked, pouting slightly as she hugged Luffy close when her nephew was talking about how he was ready to leave with his friends. Why don't you come with us? I think you would have a lot of fun fighting with Zoro. Luffy said with a grin up at his aunt, who looked at her mother hopefully. She liked being around her little nephew. He was funny and clueless and yet incredibly strong as well. He also wasn't scared by how ruthless and sadistic she could be, like her younger siblings and other nieces and nephews were. Mom can come too. Luffy said, moving to latch onto his mom. He was quite simply a mama's boy. One who saw no shame in what he was and no reason to be ashamed of it as he cuddled with his mother and hugged her whenever he wanted to. It would be a good idea in theory, Mama. Bruley said, smiling as she ran her fingers through her son's hair before looking up at her mother. Explain. Big Mom ordered her daughter, who kept one arm wrapped around her son, who was snuggled contently into her side. Well, not only will having two of your children aboard his ship show that he is allied with you, but you've been trying to find a way to help train the younger members of the family into minister and combatant roles recently. Since most of the positions are already taken, however, there's a shortage of things for them to try and do in order to further their skills. Burlee pointed out this, making Big Mom nod her head. Most of her younger children were becoming cooks simply because they couldn't compare to their older siblings' strength or abilities, and there were no free islands for them to govern. Well, if you have two, well, technically four, open positions, then they'll be able to try and take over those positions to further their own skills and gather the necessary real-life experience that they've been missing out on. Burlee said, making Big Mom look at her confused. Explain this. Big Mom ordered, looking interested as she stared at Burlee, who didn't bat an eye. Simple. Sister Amand is one of the best sword wielders in the family, the minister of Nuts Island, and one of the ones who is usually sent on ingredient hunts due to her combat prowess. If she is no longer available here because she is traveling with Luffy-chan, that leaves 3 open positions. That will give my younger siblings, nieces, and nephews incentive to further their swordsmanship in order to take her place as the best sword wielder. It will leave an open slot on ingredient hunts or extermination missions for one of them to fill in order to further their combat prowess. Not to mention, it will leave Nuts Island without a minister that will have to be selected soon, and they will learn the intricacies on how to run an island in a relatively easy to run island. No offense to you, sister. Burlee nodded to her older sister at the end and earned a snort. None taken. I set things up so that Nuts Island would be simple and easy to run for when I'm busy with missions, and so that I would have plenty of time to keep my skills sharp. Amand said, earning blinks from the other ministers who were also combatants before they began swearing when they realized that they never thought of doing that. How could they have never thought of setting up their islands so that it would be easier to run in combat and mission emergencies? With me gone, that will leave the seducing woods without a leader. You bereft your best spy, the position of head communications open, and the position of ambush expert open. Although to be fair, I believe that Monty Dor is already doing a good job as a communications expert, so that position would not be empty for long. Them taking over that, however, means that we'd need to train up another communications expert to take his place while he takes mine. Burlee pointed out that as she glanced over at her scribe brother, who gave her a surprised look. That leaves a leadership position of a relatively easy to run area open for someone to take over. That also means some of the young ones will have the chance to take over some of my spying missions to further their own skills in the art to see who would be the next head spy of the family. Some of the little ones also show aptitude in ambush tactics, so with me no longer here to do that, they'll be able to further those skills as well. Burlee counted them off on her fingers for a moment before her hand fell back to her son's head, where she ruffled his soft black locks for a moment. So not only will the two of us going with the Straw Hats ensure that it is known that such a formidable rookie has powerful allies and contacts, but it will also allow some of the younger ones to train harder and get more experience, so that your forces are altogether stronger and harder to defeat should the next person try to invade your island. Burlee summarized, and there was a full moment of silence before Burlee's eyebrow twitched when she noticed that both her son and her mother were asleep. Apparently they had fallen asleep halfway through her explanation. Mama. Perospero warily poked his mother with the end of his candy can, causing her to blink back awake. Hawa. Oh. Big Mom blinked as she recalled hearing Burlee give some detailed and probably thought-out explanation on why it would be a good idea for her and a man to leave with her grandson. Sounds good. You two have my permission to leave. Perospero, Compet arrange everything to find who is best to take over their spots while they're gone. Big Mom said, pretending she had heard every word and making Burlee twitch slightly. You didn't even hear half of what I said, did you? Burlee asked, earning a shake of the head from her mother. Huh? Luffy woke up blinking at his mother, who twitched again as she looked down at her son. You take after your grandmother, don't you? Burlee asked, making Luffy blink and yawn at the same time as Big Mom did. Luffy drowsily detangled himself from his mother and launched himself up onto his grandmother's lap, curling up like a kitten. Sorry, Mom. I was tired. Luffy said, smiling sleepily even as he rubbed his eye with the back of his wrist, at the same time his grandmother was rubbing at her own eyes. I can't tell if he's just that much like her or if he's just being a little shit to everyone right now. Sanji muttered to Nami, who gave a small snort of agreement. Yo-ho-ho-ho. If you're tired, Luffy-san, let me play you a lullaby. Brook said happily as he began playing a soft melody on his violin before anyone could stop him. My son takes after my mother too much for my sanity. Burlee said, her eye twitching again when the first few notes of the lullaby had both her son and her mother falling asleep. Your new world born and bred, Burlee. Amand said, smiling slightly as she threw an arm around her younger sister's shoulders. So what? Burlee asked, confused by why her sister was bringing that up. It was a sad fact that none of them could argue with Amand's words. That means that much like the sea we live in, you never had any sanity. To be fair, the rest of us are just as bad. Wow. Luffy had stars in his eyes as he and his crew attended the party that was originally meant to be a wedding. They were turning it into a mix between a party to welcome Luffy back to the family and a going-away party for Broly and Amand. You've never been to one of Mama's tea parties before, so it's no wonder you're amazed. What can I get you to drink, Luffy? Smoothie asked, looking at her nephew with a small smile on her face. She could see why Amand would actually smile and all around her rubber-brained nephew. Luffy was cute and kind of naive, but he truly didn't see anything different about a normal person, a snake neck, a long leg, or even something like Pudding's third eye and Pear's teeth. Smoothie was pretty sure that he wouldn't even see anything strange at all about Katakuri Nai-chan's teeth and mouth. Luffy asked, tilting his head up at Smoothie, who smiled at him for a second longer and then reached for the giraffe. The sound it made was sure to make her nephew laugh, given what she knew of his sense of humor from the past few days he stayed at the chateau with them. She was right as she twisted the giraffe's neck, and her nephew busted out into peals of laughter that caused his crewmates scattered around the roof to relax and glance over at him with smiles on their faces. "Thought you'd find that funny," Smoothie said with a small grin as she handed him the full glass only for him to hug her leg before taking it. "Thanks, Auntie," Luffy said cheerfully as he took the glass and threw it all back in one large gulp, much to his aunt's amusement. "Oh, our guests are here. Welcome. Can I get you something to drink?" Smoothie asked, glancing up from her rubber nephew and spotting the underworld leaders that had just walked through the doors. When they remarked about having some of the giraffe, Smoothie grinned as her nephew busted out laughing at the noise it made when she juiced it again. Two of the underworld men busted out laughing as well as she began to hand out the drinks to the group before refilling her nephew's glass, this time with a meteor rock. "Thank you," Luffy said brightly, grinning up at his aunt who merely patted his head gently and shooed him away. "Anytime, Luffy. Why don't you go see how Company is doing?" Smoothie asked, spotting her oldest sister talking with some of the others invited from some other islands. "Okay," Luffy said, draining his glass and then bouncing off towards his oldest aunt, who caught him in a half hug when he tried to use a gum-gum rocket to hug her. "Nice try, aunt, but you're 20 years too early to try and sneak attack me," Compet said, grinning as she held him in one arm easily while he whined slightly before perking up when his arms stretched around her in a hug. "Hugs, however, are a different matter," Compet said, smiling wider as she hugged her nephew close before letting him down onto his feet, only for him to bounce up onto her shoulder. "You're tall. I can see everything from here," Luffy said, laughing a bit and causing Compet to blink before shaking her head in amused fondness. Her nephew knew almost nothing about boundaries, especially the ones that most of the family grew up learning with their uncaring mother and their army of siblings. "Of course I'm tall. You have seen Mama, right? With her being so tall, of course her kids are all tall too. Why, Banana is one of the youngest and she's already up to your shoulders," Compet said, making Luffy look over at his grandmother who was laughing with some of the other guests. "True," Luffy said, nodding and earning a smile from his aunt. "Don't worry though. You're probably just a late bloomer. In a few years you'll be up to my shoulders, I'm sure," Compet said, trying to reassure her unusually short but powerful nephew. "I could just stretch," Luffy said, bouncing down from her shoulder and then stretching his legs and stomach and chest until he was roughly the same height as her. "Don't stretch yourself too thin, Luffy," Amand said as she was passing by them and causing Luffy to snap back to his normal size in a way that had the others wincing at the snapping sound. The ones Compet had been talking with stared in disbelief as the famous rookie that had been so casual and comfortable with Compet just as quickly launched himself at Amand and wrapped himself around her while she let out a small hissing laugh as she caught him easily instead of trying to cut him like many thought she would. Why was this rookie so casual and comfortable with the feared Big Mom pirates? How was he able to get away with being so casual and touchy with them? Why were they letting him? "Ah, there he is. Luffy came here so you can meet some friends of mine," Big Mom called, making the boy disentangle himself from Amand and rocket himself straight at the large elderly woman. Luffy ended up bouncing off of her shoulder and going rolling across the floor until he landed in front of his mother, who was standing with Katakuri and Parasparrow. "Did you forget that Mama has an iron body?" Broly asked, raising an eyebrow at her son who looked up at her looking a bit dazed still. "Nope, but now I'm seeing 3 of my Uncle Machi," Luffy said with a dazed smile as he tried to focus on his uncle, who gently picked up his little nephew and carried him over to Big Mom, who was laughing at what had happened. "That was quite the tumble. Do we need to get Bree or that reindeer doctor of his to check over Lu-chan?" Parasparrow asked even as he licked the large lollipop he was holding. "That was awesome," Luffy said happily as he bounced out of Katakura's arms and over to Big Mom, who was still laughing. "That was funny. You'll have to do it again," Big Mom said, grinning at her grandson, who grinned back as he hopped up in her lap. "Everyone I know came here for a wedding, but something more important happened," Big Mom announced as she stood up, causing all talking to cease as she held Luffy up in one hand. The boy was positively tiny in her hand as he grinned at everyone. There were gasps of shock, more than a few murmurs of disbelief, and one loud cry of big news from Morgans at Big Mom's next words. My grandson has returned home. Monkey D. Luffy here is the son of my 8th daughter Brulé and has returned home to us. Luffy said, waving at the rest of the party with a grin on his face that was as wide as the sky and as bright as the sun. Most of those not part of the Charlotte family blushed a bit at the bright grin on his face as they stared at the boy who was so at ease with the large fearsome Yonko. You were literally just announced a prince of Mama's empire and you just say hi. Brulé said, face palming at her son's actions and causing him to blink over at her clueless. What else would I say? Luffy asked, tilting his head to the side confused and causing Brulé to calmly walk over to her brother. Once she reached Katakuri's side, she buried her face in his leather jacket and released a muffled scream before pulling away. Feel better? Nami asked, stepping over to pat Brulé on the back as the tall woman nodded her head while her brother rubbed her back soothingly. Get used to doing that multiple times a day. Sanji said, lighting another cigarette and offering Amanda light when she pulled out a fresh cigarette as well. She had the feeling that she was going to be smoking more around her nephew than ever before. Why? Brulé asked, her eyes snapping to her son's crewmates who looked at each other. Should we tell her or wait until something happens and she sees it for herself? Chopper asked, looking at the others a bit curious as to how to explain it to the woman. Let me experience it firsthand. Nami said with a small cackle as she threw back her shot of liquor, and the cackle had a few chills going down the spines of those nearby. She sounded more like a witch than Brulé ever could. Even Brulé would admit to fearing for her title of Mirror Witch right then, given the positively witch-like cackle Nami had given as Smoothie refilled her glass. There's no way to explain, Luffy said properly. Best for them to learn from experience. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Brook laughed, which earned a few startled jumps from those who thought he was just a prop of some kind. After all, it wouldn't be the strangest decoration that they've ever seen at one of Big Mom's tea parties. She was known to have some rather unique designs every once in a while, especially with her fascination for unique or one-of-a-kind rare objects and animals. If he's anything like my sister was when she was younger, then I'm going to be needing a lot more cigarettes and alcohol. Amanda said with a sigh as she exhaled a puff of smoke and earned a sympathetic look from Sanji, as well as an offered second cigarette. She gratefully took the nicotine stick of cancer and waited until the one in her mouth was down to the last bit before she threw it away and put the second one in, letting Sanji light it up for her. Even if it meant she had to lean her long neck way down. On the plus side, things are never boring with him around. Nami offered with a smile and another small snicker as she threw back another pint of liquor, as if it were rum. It wasn't, but damn if she wasn't going to be trying to get drunk off of it. Smoothie helpfully refilled her glass for her again. She could tell that the navigator definitely needed some drinks, which would explain why the girl was sticking close to her. True. The rest of the Straw Hats present agreed in an instant with nods of their own and small smiles of remembrance of one incident or another. And hey, we always end up getting stronger and stronger and able to protect each other better. Sanji said with a smirk as he looked at the others, who nodded in agreement and then all raised their cups in unison before tossing them back as one. He still tries to make our hair go grey early though. Nami said, making the others nod sagely in agreement. Except Robin, but that's because she thinks his antics are funny. Chopper pointed out as he moved over to his captain and was scooped up into his arms without thought as the reindeer nuzzled his captain's neck. Robin is a special sort of crazy. She just hides it easily. Nami said with a snort at Chopper's words. Nami Swan, we are all crazy. We did agree to join him, remember? Sanji asked, looking at Nami, and his voice was deadpan. Ah, the age-old question of who's crazier. The leader who everyone calls crazy or the ones who follow the leader knowing how he is. Such a conundrum that it makes even my brain hurt, although I no longer have one. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Brook laughed again, and more than a few other people were giving him confused and weird looks. Hey, how come there's no music? Luffy asked, blinking up at his grandmother curiously and apparently not caring that his crew called him crazy. Huh? Oven asked, blinking at his nephew and having a sinking feeling that he knew where this was going. Brook. Music. Luffy called to the skeleton, who immediately grabbed up his guitar with a laugh. Of course, Captain. The usual. Brooks asked, starting up a tune and making Luffy laugh and nod, his crewmates letting up a loud cheer at the music that they knew by heart. The older pirates all thought that it was familiar. Yo-ho-ho, yo-ho-ho-ho. Yo-ho-ho, yo-ho-ho-ho. Brooks started them off like usual. Gather up all of the crew. It's time to ship out Bink's brew. The rest of the Straw Hats immediately began singing with their musician, while Big Mom's face lit up. She knew this song too. Her children exchanged looks as they heard the familiar song. They all knew it. Sea wind blows. To where? Who knows? Slowly each of the Charlottes began singing along with their nephew's son and his crew. The waves will be our guide. Or across the ocean's tide, rays of sunshine far and wide. Even Big Mom joined in, all of the pirates singing happily as the song brought back memories of different times. All of them happy while the guests looked around stunned and confused, and Morgan snapped plenty of pictures while Strussie seemed amused as she hummed along. My. He's certainly a cheerful thing for being born to the revolutionary dragon and a daughter of a Yonko. Strussie said, smiling slightly as her eyes stayed focused on Straw Hat Luffy, who was now dancing with his crew and mom, dragging various guests and homies and other Charlottes into the giant tea party that was becoming an actual party. I'm interested to see how you and the rest of your crew grow, Straw Hat Luffy. Thanks for watching this video. Part 4 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.